Well, hey everyone, my name is Mashal and I'm so happy to have you all here today. Welcome to another session of Small Biz UAE. This is one part of a series of webinars that Shura has been hosting in terms of their Small Biz UAE initiatives. And I mean, I'm a big fan of Shura and the work they've been doing because they've been doing a lot to support the entrepreneurs and the ecosystem as a whole. And it's through these webinars. They've recently even had a grant and a bunch of different things. So please check out the work that they're doing. You can follow them on their socials at Sharjah on social media, and check out their programs and their website. And they're one of the best organizations in the region, especially who've been doing actual work. So that's on their end. Today I'm going to be having a really interesting discussion with two of the amazing founders. I think it's been no surprise, like COVID has hit everybody hard, especially business owners in the startup ecosystem as a whole, but just business owners and just, I think people across different industries, I think we've all been impacted in some way or the other. But what's really interesting about these two founders is they actually launched during COVID. And in one of the most difficult times, if I may say so. We have Saif Essai from Nafas, and we've got Ziyaad Ahmed from Spotii. And they're going to be sharing their experiences. We're going to jump into a lot of different discussions around fundraising, investment, challenges, learning opportunities. And obviously, I want to really understand more about their experiences and how the last couple of months have been. So without further ado, let's get into it. If you guys want to introduce your businesses and tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing. Saif, if you want to start first.
Yeah, sure. Hi there. My name is Saif. I'm the founder of Nafas meditation app. And what we basically do is we provide an app that allows you to have meditation content, helps you reduce stress, anxiety through the practice of mindfulness. Again, we're focusing on the Arabic population with the Arabic content, and that's mainly due to the lack of such a content in the region.
Amazing. Ziyaad, if you can go next.
Sure. Hi, my name is Ziyaad Ahmed. I am the co-founder of Spotii. Very simply, we are a buy now, pay later. We are the first of our kind in the region. We are a company that's focused on fashion, beauty, lifestyle brands. We allow our consumers, once they've signed up on Spotii, to shop at any one of our Spotii merchants and split their purchase in 4 truly cost-free installments. I know that there's a lot, this concept of buy now, pay later has become very prevalent in the region. But what I would say is that one of the things that really differentiates Spotii is when we say cost-free, we really mean cost-free. As a consumer, you will never pay us more than what your purchase price is. We make money by charging the merchant.
That's incredible. And I think so. Sally and I were just talking about this yesterday, actually, about what's the catch here in terms of, and I think that kind of speaks more to what the market is and what we as consumers are used to. It is a sorry state of affairs.
No.
But
absolutely, look, absolutely, right? That's actually the #1 question that we get from our customers as well. I sometimes man our customer service lines, and I'm speaking to our customers directly. It's like, what's the catch? And I cannot re-emphasize this enough. There is no catch. There's no hidden fees. There's no fine print here, right? You purchase something for 1,000 dirhams, you will end up paying 1,000 dirhams, and that's it. As long as you're paying us back on time, right? That's it.
That's amazing and very needed. And I think Nafas is very important as well, because I think if anything, meditation has been one thing that I've personally been going to. It's been so helpful. And I think I've seen a lot of people kind of go back into self-care and really find ways that they've been able to take care of themselves. So I think it's amazing that you're doing this. And I think it is very needed in the region as well. But let's kind of go back to phase 1, right? So fundraising and investment. One thing that I think we've also observed is that this is not a great time to fundraise. And it has been really, fundraising in the region is difficult as a whole, but fundraising during a pandemic is a whole different level of, it's kind of challenges on challenges stacked up. So how was your experience and why did you, well, one, how did you manage it? But you know, what were the learnings that you really extracted from that whole process? Like, how was the experience? Saif, if you want to start first, and then Ziyaad, I think, you know, I'd love to kind of hear both of your perspectives.
Sure. So with the Nafas, we were a little bit lucky because the timing was just perfect for us. We raised funds before the pandemic, and we launched amidst the pandemic itself. But when it comes to raising funds, specifically at this time, what we've seen that most VCs, when we contact them and talk to them, they are in a tough spot, basically trying to support their current portfolio. They want to help their current companies to get out of any troubles due to the pandemic itself. But on the other hand, the positive side, we've seen it much easier for us to contact VCs, talk to them. They're quite interested when it comes to mental health and stuff like that. The pandemic basically educated a good chunk of potential investors and potential customers as well from our side. But again, as I said, when we talk to them, it's mainly about them supporting their current portfolio. Overall, it made it a little bit easier for me specifically to talk to international and regional investors. But yeah, it's quite difficult. I mean, as you said, the current VCs in the region by default are quite hard to convince. And they're a little bit risk averse compared to other countries. So talking about the COVID-19, it just added a new layer of difficulty, a new layer of assurances, wanting them to de-risk furthermore when it comes to the business itself.
And how long did it take for you to kind of close your round? If you know, in terms of months, like when did you start? How long did it take you?
So for us, when we did the pre-seed thing, it was part of getting support from Oman Technology Fund at the pre-seed stage. So with pre-seed, it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. It's like sometimes it feels like free money because it doesn't really requires a lot of due diligence. So I wouldn't say that's a good metric for us to compare it with, but. I mean, from what we've been seeing, from what we've been understanding, it takes at least 6 to 9 months in this current atmosphere.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you're right, but also the risk for appetite is just different here. That's one thing that we've observed over the last couple of years. And for the attendees, we do have a poll because we want to know what your profile is. Please answer it. I think you should have had it by now. We've got a few entrepreneurs. We've got a bunch of different folks on here. Ziyaad, tell us more about your experiences. How was fundraising like? I mean, you know, what were the challenges? What was that whole thing like?
Sure. To be honest, it isn't too dissimilar to what Saif just described, right? So we raised our fund. We launched the company in April. So it was like, well, we were all very much quarantined, and we've actually scaled the business. We're now in office, but we were scaling the business over Zoom and Teams. So that was an interesting experience. But in terms of my background, I'm very new to the region. I moved in December to start up Spotii, and I moved from Silicon Valley. So for me, it's been a culture shock, because VCs and the Valley is the mentality there is just so different to the mentality here. As Saif mentioned, there's a little bit more risk averseness here, right? The Valley, you tend to be like, you have a good idea, you have a good background, you've proven yourself multiple times, you know, people are willing to sort of take that chance with you. Here, it's a little bit more of a, you know, the 6 to 9 months is probably a very fair estimate. I would say that that's true. That's been my only experience with raising here, compared to when I was in San Francisco. It would be, you know, a month, maybe 3, something like that at this stage, right? They just move faster, right? Everyone just moves faster there. So I would say that the interesting thing about our we sort of had saw our fundraising go through several different cycles, which is not too, probably very similar to how the consumer was reacting to the pandemic. There was first, we started talking to our VCs well in advance of the pandemic. Pandemic hit, everyone starts freaking out. There's a lot of fear, etc. So all VCs shut down. They stop returning your calls. It's kind of like, look, we need to focus on our portfolio. We have no idea what the world is going to look like 6 months from now, right? The beauty about our product is actually it works really well, especially in times like this, right? Like this is exactly the kind of time that people need that peace of mind where they can purchase what they want and split it over installments, right? So the merchants required as well because of the fact that it helps them accelerate their revenue. So it was a great, for us, it was a great product market fit. So it went from no one's returning our calls to suddenly we got a whole flood of interest, right? Especially once we went to market, we demonstrated proof of concept. So for us, we've actually grown really well. Now we're over 100 merchants and some very large merchants in the region over the last 3 months. So now we're sort of we're seeing that floodgate sort of open. So if I were to give advice on the experience just in general, one, have tenacity, be prepared to hear no hundreds of times. Don't take it personally, right? There's always going to be 1,000 reasons why someone's going to say no to your idea, but you only need that one yes, right? You believe in it, keep moving it forward, right? Someone will come in, and to the execute simultaneously, right? It's much easier to show people what you do as opposed to telling them, right? So if somebody says no, for us, it was like, okay, we don't have any funding, let's bootstrap it. So we get to proof of concept, all right? Once we bootstrapped it and showed the proof of concept, it becomes an easier conversation.
Gotcha. So execute while raising and be prepared to hear multiple no's. I think that's actually one thing that's very true. And it's interesting because I mean, this is a conversation that goes back and forth, but I'm so glad you mentioned how your obviously like Spotii was super useful to people during the pandemic, because I think what we've seen is also different behaviors from different segments across the board, right? Some folks, I mean, one thing I was noticing, which is super interesting, was a lot of people have either started panic buying during a couple of months earlier on, or, there were like, you would expect certain behaviors, but it's been different. So that was actually one thing that I wanted to correlating it back to Spotii, right? Like how did you see sort of consumer behavior change? And were there any metrics that really like changed overnight for you guys? Once the pandemic hit?
Absolutely. So, so my co-founder, the reason I ended up here is my co-founder is my sister. She's been in the region for the past 14 years. She was in San Francisco visiting me, and she was like, I was doing the exact same thing there with Afterpay. If you're familiar with the buy now, pay later industry, you'll know that Afterpay has now become one of the biggest companies in the sector. It's now $25 billion, something like that. But I was launching that in San Francisco and scaling that up in San Francisco, and she convinced me to move out here. And the macro thesis there was sort of twofold, right? There's one, which is there's the technological transformation that you're going to see in payments is cash is a very outdated technology, right? We are all moving towards some kind of digital payment. When you actually think of cash, it's an incredibly outdated technology, right? I can tell you from in San Francisco, it's one of those things where you go to a restaurant and if it's a cash only bar, they will advertise that, right? Like you have to go out and find cash. Do you know what I mean? Because just no one carries it. So from we've seen this happen around the world, and we're seeing it happen here. There was a macro trend moving away from cash as that form of currency. That was one. Two, there was a migration that was happening offline to online, right? Like that's true everywhere. When I landed, probably 3% of all transactions, all retail transactions in the region was online. That compares to the US at 20, right? But you sort of see that shift happening regardless. People, consumers are becoming, especially the younger generations, are increasingly becoming and shopping online. So those are the macro trends that pulled us here, and was just like, look, it's if you kind of look at the region, it's 20 years behind where San Francisco is. Eventually it'll catch up. There's a good opportunity here from that perspective. What the virus did was accelerate both of those trends massively, right? Overnight, we saw merchants who previously completely dismissed the online channel trying to scramble to get online, right? Like, yeah, that 3%, if I were to estimate, is probably now closer to 20 or 30. And that kind of happened over the span of 3 months, right? And also, when you have the virus, you cannot transact in cash, right? Cash on delivery was one of those things that people did not want to do. So from our perspective, it really was perfect market timing in the sense that those two macro trends really accelerated. What we believe is that those macro trends are behavioral shifts, right? When you've transacted once using a payment like Spotii online, the convenience that it offers will ensure that you will never sort of go back to your old ways again, right? And I think there was a study put out by Deloitte that polled the region, and they found that maybe 52% of their respondents said that their behavior has forever been impacted. The transactional behavior in this manner has been forever impacted as a result of the virus.
Incredible. And for sure, I think that was the cash on delivery shift, I think, is really big for the region because that has been unheard of before. And I mean, in some ways, I'm not going to say I'm glad, but it took a pandemic to kind of switch us to.
I mean, honestly, I'm glad. Like when you're in payments and you're speaking to a merchant, you're speaking to consumers. No one likes cash on delivery. No one does, right? Like cash on delivery was a thing in the US in the 80s, right? Like when the internet was just starting to come up. Just no one likes it. Merchants hate it. Consumers hate it. There's no reason for it really to exist.
I mean, consumers, I wouldn't say as much because I think there is sometimes a general mistrust of what you're going to get, right? And there has been a sort of distrust when it comes to online payments, right? In terms of safety and in terms of what if I get charged a lot more? What if I'm not able to get my reimbursement? So there's different doubts that I feel like on the consumer end exist, right?
No, absolutely. Those doubts exist, right? But that doesn't mean that you do it to protect yourself. That doesn't mean you like it, right?
Yeah.
For example, there are people I know here that used to transact just with cash, and I was at a friend's house and they were like cash on delivery, and they're scrambling to find the exact change. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a seamless process. It's like one of those things where they got frustrated. They're like, I don't have the exact, like you don't know when the person's going to come, and I'm like, I don't have the exact change. So I 100% agree with you as to that's why consumers have leaned into cash on delivery, which is again part of a natural cycle, right? Like even in the US in the 80s, people did cash on delivery because you're transacting with someone online, you have no idea who it is. It is that mistrust, right? But the good news is that the merchants here are very legitimate, right? And it's I think it's more a perception as opposed to a real problem of mistrust, right? I've been using, since I've landed here, I've only shopped online over, several merchants. I've never had an issue using digital payments.
I would say, Ziyaad, that due to the pandemic, the first time barrier where people are afraid to try something and then discover that it actually works and it's fine. Basically, the pandemic forced that to happen, and it's similar to me as well. I had this grocery app in my phone for the past 6 months, and I never used it until the pandemic hit. And since then, it's okay. It's quite simple. I'll do it again and again and again.
So, Saif, you would be one of those 52%, right, of respondents, right? Like you previously had never had a reason to try it. You have tried it now. You've seen it being seamless. So there's no reason for you not to continue to use it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But Saif, how's your experience been? I mean, tell us, because you're on a very different side, right? Where it is online, it's a little bit different in terms of it is an app. So what were your metrics like? And again, how did that change? How did you see user behavior change in terms of that?
Well, for us, I mean, it's quite different from e-commerce. Although e-commerce didn't grow in such a way that we want it in the region, it's to some extent is known, it's visible, it's mature to some extent. With us, wellness is a new thing. I mean, we've seen trends when it comes to meditation, yoga, and stuff like that, but in a very, very limited way, and that got us to a very important question. Should we start pushing our paid and premium features from the very beginning? Since again, we're very similar to Ziyaad, we actually launched on the 20th of April. Or should we use this pandemic as an education tool that will push usage when it comes to wellness? And for us, we want to the second choice. And basically, what we decided to do is to provide Nafas for free for everyone, in the hope of building a community around it, building some loyalty as well, and anyone who might deter him the pricing or the money or whatever it is, he'll have a chance to use and test it and try it. We believe that building a community is a great opportunity for us in this pandemic, since a lot of people are looking for such a thing. That's from one side. I mean, again, as a startup, that might not be the best choice. Again, we're here about de-risking our business, and taking longer to de-risk it is a risk by itself. But we thought this is an opportunity that doesn't really happen every day. We should try and get something out of it. So that's from one side. The other side, which is very interesting, because before the pandemic, we had an MVP. We've been doing testing, and one of the growth engines that we focus a lot in is digital marketing. And what we've seen before and after, during the pandemic, is the pricing of acquiring a free user. It's a fifth of what used to be. So before, we were talking about $1 and 20 cents for us to get a download, and now we're talking about 20 cents, sometimes even lower, which is very unexpected for us, because we've heard a lot about digital marketing having a tough time, and things around digital marketing. But for us, it seems that people are seeing our advertisements and they're interacting favorably with it. I mean, it's too early for us to say that that's a very good indication, but it gives us some hope at the very beginning.
That is fascinating. And I think, I mean, I would say give yourselves a lot of credit as well, because I mean, the reason it has been converting is that I'm sure like your messaging and the way that you've been doing it has been effective as well, right? Like those are all different components that come into play. And especially because, I mean, I know that phone usage has increased like significantly, but at the same time, there are some ads that have just been very off-putting as well, right? So I guess it also depends on what's effective, how you're getting it through. But that's incredible that you've been able to really achieve that. So this is a question that I really want to know. I mean, would you guys be able to share any metrics, if you're comfortable with that, in terms of just user growth and patterns, like in terms of specific metrics and numbers, if you're willing to share those? Even a ballpark figure would work.
So I think by today or tomorrow, we're going to reach around 50,000 registered users. We've seen, so for the first month, we reached around 8,000 users. We're talking about, I think, around 750 daily active users that listen to 30 to 50 hours of meditation every day. The next month, it almost doubled. It went to 16,000, around 1,500 daily active users. Again, we're talking about 60 hours of daily meditation in total. At the moment, we're talking about 50,000 registered users, 3,000 daily active users, and they're listening to over, I think, 200 or 166 hours of meditation every day. So we've been seeing consistent growth. And yeah, it gives us really high hopes. But again, about de-risking, don't forget that you need them to pay money later on.
I love that so much. I love that so much. And I love that you've had your stats. Like, this is like, great founders know their stats and they know their specific metrics. And I love that. But I also really appreciate the fact that you understand the importance of community building and loyalty, because that's one thing we've seen across the board. So I run a media company, and one thing we've realized is, people who believe in your product and your service will come back again. Like, those are the ones you really want to grow, right? So on our end, that would mean reading 4 to 5 articles at a stretch instead of reading like one article and bouncing off. And I think I think it's incredible that you did think about that, especially for a product where, again, this is a relatively newer one. Just, I think the idea of wellness, you're right, like in the region, I mean, I think we're just starting to, it's pretty nascent, to be honest, right? So I think it's incredible that you've been doing that. Ziyaad, if you want to share any metrics, and I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. So we did our first transaction on April 22nd, and we launched with 4 merchants. And now, like I said, we're over 100, right? So that's kind of that merchant growth has kind of been all of our underlying growth. It follows very closely to it. We're adding about anywhere between 4 and 8 a day, right? So that's it is important. I think that from our perspective also, I know people don't normally think about payments in the same form of community, right? But that's our brand, is that we do think of our consumers as our community, right? If you kind of look at the way we position ourselves, our brand, the way that we interact with our customers, it is that concept of we're here to help you, right? Like, we are offering you a service which is good for you, right? Like, you are able to live your life with a little bit more peace of mind, right? And that message has really resonated well with our customers. Like, once you sort of get over the hump of where's the catch, is there a catch, someone uses it, they love us, right? The comments that we get from our customers on a daily basis, the referrals that we get, is just it's heartwarming.
Incredible. And I think that's pretty spectacular to go from like 2 to 100. I mean, that's pretty significant. And I definitely hope that more merchants sort of really do get on board, because I really think this is it is a necessary service. And I think you're definitely, like, you've hit the spot with this one. So based on how you've seen user patterns and segments and different things, right? I mean, what do you feel like, what are some growth opportunities that you've identified in the industry as a whole based on this? Because one thing that we have realized, I mean, again, is that like a lot of current and existing businesses have been forced to change and think outside the box, right? Like, we've been forced to innovate, and I hate the word innovate because it's a buzzword, but most business owners haven't had a choice. It's either, you have to adapt to COVID and how the world is now, or you're going to get left behind. So based on your experiences, I'd love to kind of understand, what would you identify and consider opportunities now?
I mean,
Yeah, can go ahead with that until I think of a good, smart answer.
Yeah, look from our perspective, right? This, I think we were kind of in the heart of this. The entire retail sector has had this shift of innovation from offline to online, right? And we were kind of in the heart of it. I would say there is that opportunity of being able to be omni-channel and being able to be where the customer is, no matter what your sector is, right? So, for example, we are a data-driven company. I am a data scientist by background, so everything, when we are talking about, we monitor things like UAE consumer interest trends across different sectors, right? And one of the things we noticed during the pandemic was that people, as an example, people had a very strong desire for fitness and wellness and meditation that very much falls within Saif's world. But, for example, one of the things we were monitoring was the number of mentions online from a UAE consumer of words such as "I'm stressed," "I can't sleep," etc. And you sort of saw that spike up during the pandemic. The other thing we noticed was that when gyms reopened, people were dying for fitness, but there was a dichotomy online where like people are like, I need to get back to the gym, but I'm afraid of and rightfully so, I'm afraid of the virus. And we have a lot of studios on our platform. And when we sort of saw these data trends, we presented that to them, because that's how we also work with our merchants, is that we use big data to help them find new opportunities and new sectors of opportunities, and how consumer interest is inflecting in different ways. And we presented the idea to these studios where it was like, look, the people that are outperforming right now are the ones that are engaging with the consumer at home, right? So stop thinking of yourself as a studio with a physical location, and start thinking of yourself as your gym everywhere, right? So one of our studios does spinning classes, and we were like, you've got all these bikes, you're not using them, ship them to someone's house, because you already got the content. You can stream directly stream in their home, right? Start offering this. People are dying to use your bikes. They want to come in. They're just afraid of it. So you have to stop thinking of yourself as, this is my sort of retail mall space. You just have to be everywhere. It changed their business model completely. They did listen to our advice, and it went from the studio saying, I'm going to shut down in a month, to you help completely reinvigorate and save my business, right? And it's that. So the opportunity. So change is hard. Change is really difficult. Trust me, I know. Moving from the US, where I lived my entire life, to a completely new region, but leaning into it, right? Leaning into and adapting to that change is basically how you do survive.
I think I came up with something good since Ziyaad talked, but he reminded me actually of a friend of mine, and they have a startup that does basically tracking for kids in school buses. And again, with the pandemic, all the schools shut down, no buses, and it felt like they have to shut down any moment there. But what is very interesting about them is that they actually went back to their core, which is IoTs, Internet of Things devices, that enabled them to have tracking system for buses and stuff like that. And we're talking about within 2 months, they were able to work with the Ministry of Health here in Oman. They were able to provide tracking systems for people who are infected with COVID-19. And it's basically a huge pivot when it's seen from the outside, but when we go look deeper in it, it's basically their core. It's IoTs, and they didn't really do much anything of a difference there. So when it comes to opportunities, there's always opportunities. It's just having that mentality of change, like Ziyaad mentioned, and having that flexibility to be able to take such opportunities. When we're talking about the general landscape, obviously e-commerce, wellness, telemedicine, transportation, logistics were the biggest opportunities in the pandemic. But again, it's really dependent on how lean and how flexible you are in taking such risks and such opportunities.
That is an incredible pivot, and a very timely one. So that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Let's kind of move on from pivots to actually talking about launch. So both of you mentioned that having bootstrapped launches, being super specific about costs and making sure that you're understanding that this would not be like a typical launch, right? In a regular situation. So I want to kind of understand, how do you launch in a bootstrapped way? What are some tips that you would give to current founders who are thinking about launching? Based on your experience, I mean, what can you kind of scale back on? And what was, so that's one thing I want to understand is obviously that, like, again, a launch in a bootstrapped way, but the other is, you know, how would your launch have been different in comparison, right? As compared to like a regular, if there was not a pandemic, like how would you have launched instead? Because I'd really like to see like that comparison between like, this was the ideal scenario, but this is what we ended up doing, right? And I feel like that'll be super useful to founders. So if you like, I'd love to kind of understand that from you guys.
So Nafas is not really my first startup. I've done a few before, and I think I learned it wasn't about COVID, to be honest, when it came to the launch. I just learned from my past experience it's wasteful to spend money in a launch. I mean, what are you gonna do? Like a small party or a small press conference and invite people, have like lunch, and it's honestly that's a lot of waste that you don't really need to do. We are used to have those fancy appearances because we learned this from other segments that are not suitable for startups, honestly. So for us, our launch was dependent on two main things. First of all, we needed to, again, since we're community focused, we needed to have something when it comes to the social media. We had to work a little bit hard before we launch the product to create some buzz, some awareness when it comes to the social media. The other thing is basically utilizing our connections, and this is OTF helped a lot when it came to that. They connected us to the local newspapers, the local TV and stuff like that, that gave us that initial boost of yeah, basically the same thing that we would have done in a press conference, but for free. Yeah, I mean, it was amazing. We did this interview on the TV, and I haven't watched TV in years, like a proper channel. I use Netflix. I cut the cord like years ago, and it was amazing. We were having like 1,000 downloads within an hour of that interview, and I never believed that TV or interviews would have such an effect. So for us, yeah, we learned a little bit from our past experiences, but we actually got surprised by a few things when it came to the TV, the interviews and stuff like that. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I love that in terms of having a bootstrapped launch. I think for sure, but also I'm surprised by how effective the TV was, because that's actually something that I completely resonate with. I don't, you know, it's just subscriptions or just, you know, online, but it goes to show different channels can have effectiveness that we might be underestimating.
And it actually reached a very different segment from the one that we were targeting. And I had friends calling me. We were watching the TV with our family because our dad or mom were forcing us to watch this local channel, and we saw you. So it was very, very interesting.
That is fascinating. What about you, Ziyaad?
Right, so this is my third startup, and I would say that honestly, you don't do it any differently, right? Like it can be, it all kind of starts. There's a lot of there's differences, but there's a lot of similarities in how you start. And I do think that the way that you have to, regardless of whether the startup is bootstrapped or an external investor's money, you kind of have to take a mentality of how would you treat this if this was your money, right? So I honestly regard, pandemic or not, I would not have treated the startup and the expense management in any different of a manner. But look, at the end of the day, especially when you are small, and there is that risk, having that eye on expenses, right, is incredibly and very practically important, right? Because, you know, like this pandemic was in our favor. What if the next one is not, right? Like, what if the internet suddenly went down or something like that? Do you see what I mean? So from that perspective, right, just I like to view things as if, look, if something, you run a lean team, whether you're 4 people where we started, or 20 people, 25 people where we're at right now, or 100 people when you scale, right? Because at the end of the day, expenses, it's kind of like that saying, you're not as rich as your income, you're as rich as your expenses, right? So.
Speaking of a lean team, I mean, there's been a lot of downsizing over the last couple of months. I mean, so a lot of people have been affected, and while unemployment has been increasing, you guys had a different challenge, which is building a great team, right? So I'm assuming that you would have had a relatively easier time, given that there is so much of incredible talent to pick and choose from. But I want to know, how was that experience like? I mean, was it challenging? Was it easier? Like how did that go? Like, and how did you build a great team?
So with us, again, the pandemic came in a very in the right place. By the time that the pandemic started, the core team was already there. The people who are like programmers, content creators, the people that do the core stuff, we already had them part of our team. Now, what we've seen is that, again, our team is a little bit lean because we're in a pre-seed stage. We're aiming for a seed, but we don't really have to have full-timers. We don't have to have like a great experienced people at this initial stage, because we're mainly about de-risking and validation our business model. So during the pandemic itself, honestly, we were mainly dependent on part-timers who had I wouldn't say senior experience, but they've been in the market for like a year, 2 or 3 years. And because of the whole situation where they had to work from home, because some of them unfortunately had pay cuts, they were more flexible, they were more interested in working together, and it wasn't really just a business transaction to them. It was mainly of trying to build that team and working together to achieve a higher goal when it comes to Nafas. So for us, it wasn't challenging, but at the same time, because we're not really in that stage where we can hire the talents that we've seen laid off. I mean, we're talking about people from Kareem, we're talking about people from amazing startups. We're just too young for us to be able to attract such amazing talents.
I guess from my perspective, we scaled the team while we were remote, so it was an interesting experience, right? So that in itself has its own challenges, right? Like, you are growing a business while you're literally in lockdown. For example, the entire office had never met physically each other till, I think it was like 3 weeks ago, right? Everyone was on Zooms and Teams and things like that. But having said that, as Saif highlighted, there was a lot of downsizing that happened. It was really unfortunate. Everyone wants to live in the UAE. It's an exciting place to be in. No one wants to go home. You do need a job to stay here. So because of that, you are fortunate that you are able to be selective with the people that you onboard, right? But having said that, in spite of the fact that there is this wider pool of talent, I would still say when you are small, you're starting up, finding that right mix of people has its own challenges, right? Like, you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people, very closely with these people. It's going to be a very small team. Finding that right mix of personality, work ethic, passion, all of those things. I mean, that's going to be challenging, pandemic, non-pandemic, whatsoever, like whatever, right? We've been very fortunate. I would say that when people ask me what's the best thing about your company, and I say, the number one thing I do say is my team. We've been very fortunate with the fact that we've been able to find some very people that check all those boxes, right? And the thing is that we actually enjoy coming to work. We enjoy hanging out together. We spend a lot of time together. We spend time together over the weekends as well. And it's a nice culture to build from that perspective. But look, that culture doesn't come easily, pandemic or no pandemic, right? Like it's challenging. But yeah.
And are you guys, so are either of you considering going remote in the future, or is it going to be back to the office after?
Actually, we were remote from the very beginning, to be honest. So our team is around, I think, 9 or 10 at the moment, and we are from 5 different countries. So we have people from Jordan, Bahrain, Oman. We have from Egypt as well, Algeria. So it's quite diverse, and maybe because I'm a technology guy, I don't mind it. I mean, COVID-19 for me was really relaxing compared to a lot of other people. So yeah, for me, I mean, with Nafas, we started remote completely from the very beginning. The only instances were when me and my co-founder were meeting, and that's it. It has its own challenges, as Ziyaad said. It's very different compared to sitting with people, chatting, talking about random stuff, meeting them outside of a work environment. But again, it's for us, it's some talents were quite rare when we're talking about content creation, about narration, and it forced us to say, okay, let's explore this and see where it will go with us.
I guess from my perspective, the Spotii is like, I come from San Francisco, so the culture that I've created here is very much based upon that, which is we have a very generous work from home policy, unlimited vacations, the flexibility to sort of stay at home or be in the office based upon your choosing, whether however you think you're most effective. And they are, but the fact is that when you are building something like this together, especially in the early days, it's really fun sitting around with the people, right? Getting to know them and things like that. So whilst we do have a very generous work from home policy, and what I mean by that is no one needs to tell anyone when they working from home, right? Like it's completely your choice whether you want to show up to the office or not. No one is tracking your movements. Our philosophy is if you hire adults to do the job, they should be able to do it themselves. And like, they know how to do it, right? You empower people to do it the way that they want to. Interestingly, though, everyone chooses to come into the office, right? They like it. It's nice it's nice, especially, I guess, maybe it was just fatigue from lockdown when you're stuck at home. A lot of our employees have kids and like trying to do Zoom calls with kids running around in the background and things like that. So like, it's like for them, it's like they like coming into the office, right? Like, a lot of people during the lockdown were huge proponents and pushing us because we expanded the team really fast. So we outgrew our old office space. They were pushing us to find a bigger office space because they want to be around here. So it's not from the office is not meant to be like this. In my experience, the office is not meant to be sort of you have to be there, right? Like, so I think that remote working has its definitive place, but look, especially when, like I said, like early days, you're going to have highs, you're going to have lows, right? The highs are really high, the lows are really low. It's nice to be around people that are sort of going through that same experience together.
For sure. I think for some people, maybe going to the office is about more regularity, because there has been that, so we're a remote first team. We've been remote from the start. So this is pretty normal, but people do have the choice to go to work and go to the office spaces. No one's going to be looking at how long they're in there, as long as, you're getting your stuff done. But there's been no differentiation for a lot of people who are pretty new to remote in terms of the whole personal life and work life, right? Because it just feels like you're working all the time, and it is the same space. So that's been one challenge that I've sort of, noticed people going through. But speaking of feeling isolated and alone, I think that's one feeling that's been across the board where a lot of founders and entrepreneurs and just people have been feeling like they're not being supported, right? And have been feeling isolated even, like they're on their own here. And so it's been a really challenging couple of months, right? Everyone's had their different journeys and whatnot. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I'm so grateful to Shira for really stepping up during the time that founders needed them to, right? And whether it was things like checking in on founders, whether it was more, actionable, initiatives. I think one thing like people will remember is like the organizations of people who've been there for them. And I think there's a very clear difference between like wishy-washy like initiatives and just actually like, putting your money where your mouth is. So that's one thing I appreciate. But one question that I had for both of you is, like, given like current incentives and whatnot that are going on, what's your advice for current business owners right now in terms of like, how do they make the most of the situation, and how do they essentially, make use of maybe even the current incentives that are going on and that are taking place?
Well, it really depends on the startup situation and where they are at the moment, which facilities that they have access to. But at the end of the day, it really never hurts for you guys to go and talk to them, tell them about your situation and how they can help you. I mean, I've been in touch with a lot of VCs, with a lot of community supporters, and it was mainly for different stuff. For example, last week I was talking to someone I knew from a VC in IDO, for example, and I was talking about how do we raise funds, what kind of data room that we need to prepare. I mean, things purely from a VC perspective. And out of nowhere, he came to me and told me, Saif, by the way, we have this initiative to support COVID-related startups. And I mean, after our talk, I see you as a perfect fit. Can you submit something for us? I mean, we were lucky in that way. And we've seen support from different entities as well. My only advice is to make sure that their objective is very similar to your objective, and it's very similar to what you mentioned, is that it's not about fluff, it's not about marketing, it's about like real support in different areas depending on what you need. So with Shira, they had multiple initiatives, if I'm not mistaken. One of them was related to marketing. I can't remember the entity name. They had a cooperation with them. And then they just recently announced that they are supporting, I think, 8 or 10 companies as well. So that kind of support is what's needed. And basically, you need to search for it and talk to people to understand more if they see an eye to what you're aiming for, and if it's real support, not some fluff that it's mainly for a news article or something like that.
I love that, talking to more people, get to understand it, and obviously making sure the missions align. That's fantastic. And yeah, the fund is a solidarity fund with Crescent Enterprises and Shira, and it's yeah, that's the one. Ziyaad, what about you?
I think I don't have a whole lot to add to that, right? It can be very lonely sometimes to start up a business. Pandemic, no pandemic, doesn't matter, right? I would say be kind to yourself, right? Like it's, try to take it a little easier and just understand that you're going to not every day is going to be that high, right? But lean into your support system. I'm fortunate enough that my co-founder, like I mentioned, is my sister. So having family around is incredibly important to me, and it's helpful that we have each other, that we know sort of what we're going through. from a personal perspective. From a professional perspective, there is a lot of resources out there available. You know, whether it's people, you know, whether you're just looking out to seek advice for someone, from someone, whether it's people who've been in your position before, government incentives, right? The UAE government has done a lot to help out small businesses during this time. There's a lot of resources available out there. It does require a little bit of work for you to go out there to find the right resources for you, but they're available, right? So.
And finally, and this is really, and I really want to encourage questions from the audience. You can submit your question, you know, we'll have a couple minutes for answering them after. But given all of the challenges and concerns and fear that people have when it comes to launching their startups, so what advice do you have for people who are looking to start up and who haven't yet? Because all of this advice has been incredible, and I think it's been useful to potential founders and existing founders, but I'd love your, you know, just hardcore advice for people who are looking to start.
It really, the advice changes depending on someone's situation, but I'm assuming, and I think it's a good assumption that most people who are looking at entrepreneurship already have a day job and they're kind of fed up of that routine and they want to try something new. My advice for you for that specific situation is you don't have to quit your job from the very beginning to be able to do something with your startup. I mean, when we're talking about startups, I've mentioned this word a lot in this webinar, de-risking. And what we are doing here is basically we have a lot of assumptions. We jumbled them together in one big ball and we said, oh, this is a perfect idea if those assumptions are all true. So even working at it at night, you're able to deconstruct all of those assumptions and validate each one by itself. Once you reach a certain stage that, okay, you're feeling that I'm not able to grow whatever I'm working on unless I'm a full-time and I'm pushing for a full team, then go and quit your job. Please don't go and quit your job before that, especially in this kind of economy. The other thing is founders, they're very, very, very important. As Ziyaad said, entrepreneurship is mainly about ups and downs. One day you'll feel that you're the best in the world. The second day when a deal doesn't go through, you'll feel like you're a failure. So make sure that you have good co-founders. And when I say good co-founders, I mean they're good. They have intelligence, both in emotional and proper intelligence, where they can support each other, helps you to be more successful when you're in a success streak, and when you're failing, it's basically them holding your hands or pushing you toward a better scenario. So I think those are the most two important things for me. Ziyaad, I'm sure he has more about that.
Yeah, no, I would echo a lot of what Saif says. That you have enough stress growing a business. Like, don't put yourself in a situation where it is a privilege to be an entrepreneur, right? Like you have the support, however you got the support, whether it's through your savings, whether it's your family, whether it's whatever it is, right? Make sure that you have that. Like, it is incredibly stressful to be worried about, you know, because there is going to be an extended period of time that you're not drawing a salary, right? Make sure that you have the ability to be able to be comfortable with that, right? In that period of uncertainty. Because you have, God knows, it's stressful enough, like growing the business, you don't need that added pressure on you, right? So from that perspective, just make sure it's the right time for you, right? And then if it's the right time for you and you do believe in your product, you think that there's a market fit, and there's a difference between being unrealistically optimistic and you know, actually doing the legwork behind it, right? If if you do think that your product is going to be successful, you believe in it, it's kind of like having a kid, right? Like there's never the right time, right? You're gonna do it, you know. You have the ability to be able, once you sort of have that personal support, right, where you can be comfortable with a period of uncertainty, that's going to be your major restriction, right? Don't go out with something, you know, don't go out with a stupid idea, right? And listen to other people. If you believe in it, sometimes the worst thing for a person is when they believe in an idea and they think they have the next billion-dollar idea, and like people around them, the people they trust are telling them maybe this is not a good time for you to be doing it. Listen to that. But ultimately, if you believe in it, there's never really a good time to be doing this, right? Or a perfect time, rather.
Absolutely. And I feel like entrepreneurship is, I mean, I'm glad that you guys gave very real advice, because a lot of times I hear very romanticized versions. And I think, I think the notion that you need to leave everything and then start your startup comes from a lot of privilege, right? Because not everybody is in that situation where they can afford to do that. And understanding the cost, the legalities, just cost structures, even just setting up, like understand what you're getting into. And even closing up a company is a whole other process, right? Which involves costs that are pretty significant. So weigh that out. I don't want to discourage people, but just, you know, don't have like this wishy-washy, like utopian version, which can be pretty dangerous. We do have a few questions. Sally, can we ask at least one of these? Because I see a couple from the audience here. Okay, so awesome. So the first one is from Mohammed Safwan, which is, assuming there will be a change in consumer behavior after pandemic, where slowly customers might switch from virtual platforms to reality. What are the precautions or steps you guys as startups have taken in advance to tackle that? And how do you plan to keep them engaged to use your products and services?
Ziyaad, go ahead. I think this is more applicable to you.
I mean, we are omni-channel, right? So our product is available in store, it's available online. So I mean, we are virtual, right? We are a technology company. So so for us, like I said, it's from my perspective, right? I don't think that there's going to be this dramatic shift where everything's going to turn virtual, right? And again, I'm coming from a place where it is several years ahead as far as that technology goes, right? Like the concept in San Francisco, virtual Teams, Zooms was a very normal part of our life, right? Even prior to pandemic, right? Like it was just like one of those things that you just did it. That doesn't mean the office went away, right? Like I don't think that there's going to be this dramatic shift. But having said that, if I'm wrong, on that, from our perspective, we are omni-channel. We're in store, we're online.
So if I understand correctly, people can go to a store and actually use Spotii. It's not just online on a website. Essentially, that's what you mean.
That is correct. If a Spotii merchant has a physical store, they can use Spotii there. If they want to shop online, they can use shop online.
Okay, that's incredible. And the second question is from Barack Gilmore, which is, how did you manage your time considering that you would be busy for your family and friends? So how did you manage your personal and your startup time?
So for me, honestly, I think it was 3 weeks ago. It was like 3 a.m. and I just finished one meeting, and I was like, am I supposed to actually have meetings at 2 a.m. until 3 a.m.? And I decided, okay, I'm going to have 4 days off, and I'm not going to talk to anyone, and I'll make my team handle everything. And yeah, so I understand that the question have two meanings, and basically as an entrepreneur in general, yes, entrepreneurship takes a lot of your time. It takes, I mean, a lot of people tell you that if you're not going to work on it like 12 hours a day, you're not really working on it. But I have a wellness application, so I'm not going to recommend that to you guys. But yeah, it's a strain, and that's why Ziyaad emphasized on having family that supports you, the family that understand what you're trying to do and believe in what you're trying to do. Because in some cases, you will have some tough times that it's unfortunate, but some families might have to sacrifice a little bit. They'll hate you a little bit about it, but I mean, they'll understand. And that's what the main thing about it. And it's the same thing with friends. You'll find yourself meeting less people over time, getting a little bit more busy, and you'll be really annoying only talking about this startup with your friends. But again, you need to be self-aware of it. You need to try a little bit harder to give everyone, I mean, remember that they were there for you before the startup, and they'll be there for you after it. A startup might come and go, but I mean, friends and family, they're quite important.
Yeah, look, that's a reality, right? Like it's you know, it's if you are in life, you have work, family, friends, fitness, and I forget what the fifth thing is, but no one is good at all five of them, right? Like it's like one of those, and that's true. You have a limited amount of time in your day, and unfortunately, a big part of it is going to be taken up when you are running a business, right? Like there's no off switch, right? It's not like I'm like, okay, I'm 9 to 5 job, I'm done, right? Like I think about my company all the time. My situation is a little bit more unique, so I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing in the sense that I did move to the country and I did really have friends here or a network here, so it's not really like I'm missing out. Right? For me, I moved to the country to start up Spotii. I work with my sister, and that's sort of my primary personal outlet, right? But having said that, even if given the amount of hours that you invest in the office, I doubt I would have had the time really to be going out and meeting a lot of people. And like, but that's, look, it's a decision you make, right? Like it is highly romanticized, this idea of being a founder and starting your own company and stuff like that. But it's funny, one of my friends in San Francisco would say that when you're a CEO, and you're also a CJO, which is Chief Janitor Officer, right? At the end of the day, if something doesn't go right, you're going to be the one cleaning it up, because ultimately the buck will stop with you. So it is a romanticized idea, right? And you sort of only hear the end of the successful stories, right? And like it's always like there's always this spin about it, when like people are just like and like these urban myths that come out, like, oh, I don't know, there was one about Travis, the founder of Uber, who was just like he didn't sleep for a week or something like that, which is all just nonsense. Like it's just like those things don't exist, right? Like you're human. But there is a reality of it, which is it is a lot of work. It is many hours, and you are going to make sacrifices along the way in order to build the business. It's just unavoidable.
Absolutely. I do have one tip, which is, well, I schedule all my work things in. So schedule your family and friends time, right? And make sure that work cannot sort of, it can conflict, right? In terms of your schedule. So if you're super organized, get that in, even if you don't have plans, and try to make sure that like when you look at your calendar and you look at your week, like make sure that you're able to, you're going to be able to look at it and figure that out, right? And do set boundaries, because you will be the person who is, I feel like as a startup founder, you do have to be your biggest advocate a lot of times, right? So even when it comes to setting boundaries, where, especially if you're working with different time zones and all sorts of things, like make sure there's a certain time after which, like, you can reply to the email. Because I'd gotten this horrible habit of I would like wake up from sleep, respond to an email, and go back to sleep. And it was so unhealthy. And so like, make sure like work messages can wait, switch off notifications, whatever works for you. But that's something you're going to have to enforce, because no one else is going to do it for you. And if someone is doing that for you, I mean, that's great, but for the most part, that won't be so. And I love the CJO analysis, because I think that is so true. Being the problem fixer, I think, is a big part of being an entrepreneur and a founder. But that was really it. Thank you so much, guys. This was a really interesting discussion. Thank you for being honest and for being so helpful and just really sharing your perspectives. We really appreciate it. I'm sure the audience and people watching have been able to learn a lot from your experiences. And yeah, thank you so much.